Amen.
Well, good morning. I'm Jeff, and I'm the senior minister here. If it's your first Sunday, glad you're here. We've been going through a sermon series about grace, and we've been talking about how God's grace saves us. Grace is just His unmerited, undeserved love to us. He shows us affection and kindness when we don't deserve it, and how that's good news, and really how it's what sets us apart from any other belief system going. That not only that He showed us grace, but that His followers are supposed to be grace people. We're supposed to be showing grace to others. That's kind of what marks us. It's our distinctive feature. Now the world, of course, for the most part, doesn't really go that direction. There's Bible verses about that too. There's a verse in Galatians chapter 6. He says, "Don't be deceived. God can't be mocked, and a man's going to reap what he sows." And that's how the world normally works. In fact, it's hard to find a verse in the Bible that's better than that one to describe how life normally works. This is the truth. A person who is angry and cruel, eventually that comes back on them in the form of destructive relationships and broken hearts and people who have given up on him. It comes back in the sense of failed relationships that have led to other failures. And you get it back. A person who struggles all their life with addiction, I mean, sooner or later you get that back and you receive the full weight of it. If you struggle with lust or with greed or pride, eventually that comes back. And there's no real getting away from it. It's just one of those things that's how life works. And we've all seen that in our own lives, and we've seen it in other people's lives, that this is how life normally goes. It's not like karma exactly, but that religious idea that pops up in other religions, that's what this is. That sooner or later, you should expect a big dose of whatever you pay out. And Galatians says it's because God can't be mocked. There is a justice in this world, and we should count on that. And yet, and we've talked about this every week for the last month, and yet Jesus comes, and he's a different way of thinking. The Word became flesh, made His dwelling with us. That's Jesus. We've seen Him, the glory of Him, the one and only Son who came from the Father, and He's full of grace and truth. Now, He's 100% truth for sure. I mean, He's you're going to get what's coming to you. Somebody has to pay for the damage that we do, and there's no getting away from that rule. And He's 100% about that. He never hides it. He talks about it more than one place. But at the same time, He's full of grace. And some people who are caught dead to rights, who deserve to have the hammer brought down on them really hard, He doesn't do that to them. He shows compassion, and He shows kindness. And the strange thing, when you read through the gospel accounts of it, I mean, it's a different culture that He's in compared to our culture, but I don't know that we've evolved that much. I mean, it offends people. Now, it never offends you when you get grace. If the teacher says, "I'm going to grade on a curve," and you knew you were going to get an F, but now you're getting a B-, well, yeah, great. We're all for that. Or if the policeman's going to give you a warning instead of a ticket, "Oh, thank you, officer. I was just following the flow of traffic." And you're thrilled when you get the grace. But it's hard sometimes when we see other people get the grace, especially if the people that they've hurt are us. When someone's hurt me, I expect them to pay for that somehow, some way. Somebody has to pay for that damage that they've done, and it can be offensive a little bit when you see somebody getting away with it, when you fully expect the hammer to come down, and we've all seen that before. Seen people who seem to be living by different rules than everybody else, and yet they just keep getting away with it. Maybe it's because they've got a lot of money, or because their name is important in town, or because they're just lucky. And you see that happen, and you see it happen enough, and it can kind of tick you off a little bit. We like to see grace when that grace comes to us. We have a hard time understanding it when it goes to other people, especially those who hurt us. And yet Jesus is full of grace. Not just full of truth, he's full of grace. And it makes you wonder, well, okay, if that's how he is, then why should I do anything? If that's how he is, then why don't I just go do whatever I want? Why can't I? And I've had people ask me that. Very rarely in a bold-faced way like that, but I've had people ask me that through the years. I was talking to somebody, it's been several years ago now, and we were having a conversation, and they were making several choices that were, they were just bad choices. And they were bad choices in the type that you could just see them burning down all these relationships. And so we talked about it. And people aren't thrilled to talk about that stuff. And I know I'm sticking my nose in somebody's business, and you felt the weight of that. They weren't happy about me wanting to show up and have that conversation. But we got to talk about it. How can you? And I started pointing it out. Look at the damage it's doing to this person and this person and this person. You're going to wake up in a few months and you're going to feel different about all this stuff. And so we're talking about it. And they're getting mad. And I can't think of a way to explain it better. And finally they said to me this thing here, and it's the kind of thing, this statement, that you might have thought at different times about different things, and it's just completely wrong. But at the time when it was tossed out to me, I'd never heard anybody say that, and it shook me a little bit. I didn't know how to answer right off. It has a ring of truth, but it's not truth. Here's what they said. They said, well, God will just have to forgive me for that. Then, I guess, because I'm going to do it anyway. And I remember thinking right off, well, that doesn't make sense, because God doesn't have to do anything. That's the whole advantage of being God. You're the top of the food chain. You don't have to do whatever you want to do. And the idea that God would have to, like a genie bound to a bottle, that God would have to do what you wanted, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's real. And I think I did say that. But I couldn't think about why it made sense, because if God is full of grace, and he clearly is, well, then why couldn't a person do that? Well, God says, forgive me for that. I'm just going to do whatever I want, and God will have to forgive me for that. And why couldn't you do that? And it got me thinking. And it's that line of thinking that I want to talk about to you today. And I'll confess to you, as I get into this thing, I don't totally have it completely controlled in my head. I know what I want to say, and I've got stuff written down and everything, right? There's stuff written down. But I haven't, it's still I'm still working it out. And so it's possible that at the end of the service, you're going to think, well, I don't know if I totally understand what he's saying. And I just ask you, if anybody feels like that, come find me sometime this week. Let's talk about it. Don't tell me after the service that was rough. That would hurt my feelings. Don't do that. But don't do that. But if you come during the week, say, hey, I was thinking about that. That's interesting. Let's talk about that. I would love to talk about this more, because I think this is a really important thing as Christians, that we get a hold of this, and I think it's hard to get a hold of. I think it's a little bit complicated, and it's hard to understand how Jesus can be full of grace and full of truth. How does he balance that? And where those things intersect, sometimes it's kind of hard to understand. So, as an illustration of that, I want to take you to the story about the cross. And you remember this kind of central story for us. Jesus was arrested and tried and went through a trial real fast, and it was kind of shenanigans there to get him on a lot of kind of underhanded stuff. And they take him to the governor, Governor Pilate, and they say, hey, you've got to get this guy. And Pilate thinks he's innocent. I don't think I want to crucify him, but the crowd is on Pilate, and Pilate finally gives in, and so they decide to crucify Jesus. And that's where we'll pick up the story. It says 2 other men, both criminals, were also led with Jesus to be executed. And remember, the cross that Jesus is on wasn't prepared for him. It was prepared for a guy, if you remember the story, a guy named Barabbas. and they're going to haul Barabbas out to be crucified, and the crowd says, give us Barabbas and you crucify Jesus. And so maybe those three guys, the two guys who were killed and Barabbas, were all part of the same group of criminals, part of the same gang of guys. And Barabbas is set free, and now Jesus is crucified, and these other two guys are crucified with him. And it says when they came to a place called the Skull, they crucified him there, and they crucified him with these criminals, one on the right and one on the left. And the skull is certainly an ominous sounding deal, and it could be named that because of what they did there. It's the execution place, so they call it the Skull. Traditionally, it's supposed to be a hillside that kind of looked like a skull, and I don't know how that would picture in your head. But that traditionally is what people said. It looked kind of the whole hill looked like a skull. And the Aramaic word for that is Golgotha. If you've ever heard Golgotha, that's where that comes from. And the Latin word for that is Calvaria, where we get the word Calvary. If you ever wonder why we talk about Calvary, it's because of that. It's that place of the skull. That's what Calvary is. And Jesus, right at the very beginning, says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. And I want to think about this for a second, because I don't know what you expect when you pray. Do you expect something to happen fast? Do you expect that it does? Nothing really happens. It's just you talking, trying to be a good example. What do you think happens when you pray? See, I think when you pray, you should expect something to happen. You should expect God to move. And it doesn't really matter what you pray. If you're praying for somebody to be healthy, you should expect God to move. That's what you're hoping. And God can say no. I mean, like I said, He doesn't have to do anything. But when you pray, you're praying with that expectation. So like if I pray, like I got a job interview, God give me courage. I can have courage to remember and say the right things. So God give me that. I'm expecting God to either touch the part of my head that activates that, or to lay it out in front of me to where He'll make it easier for me. I'm expecting God to do something. And Jesus, when He prays this, what's He expect God to do? Well, He kind of spells it out, right? And even in this prayer, I mean, that's grace. These guys are killing him, and he asks God, don't hold it against them. And I think God probably said, okay. Which is just hard to imagine. You think about, for a lot of you, it wouldn't be any one particular person. But there's a few of you that if I say, think about the person who's hurt you the most, there's a face that pops into your head. I mean, there's somebody that you think of. It's not just like in general or like lots of little things. There's somebody. I mean, think about praying that prayer for that person. And that's what Jesus is doing. Father, they don't know. If they could see what was really happening, if they could see the whole thing, they wouldn't do it, God. They're doing it out of ignorance. I mean, to even believe that about the person who hurts you the most is hard. I mean, if somebody hurts me, I want to believe it's because they're a moron or because they're cruel or because they're an awful person. But Jesus says, God, they don't know. If they knew, they wouldn't do it. And I forgive them, and I think God answered that prayer. And I wonder what effect it had, because when we read on, it doesn't seem to affect the people watching very much at all. It says they divided his clothes. Very next verse, they divided his clothes. The Nazis did that at Auschwitz, would take your clothes away and your shoes and your jewelry, and they would sort it out in front of you, and that was part of the torture of the whole thing. And now they're doing that to Jesus here. They divide his clothes. He dies with nothing. And the people are watching, and the rulers, they're sneering at him. They're mocking him even while he's on the cross. They said, he saved others. Let him save himself if he's God's Messiah. And you could read that a couple ways. Like we know he did miracles. Let's see him do a miracle now. Or maybe they're saying, we've heard he did miracles. I don't really believe it. Let's see if he can do a miracle now. And they're laughing at him while he's on the cross. You say you can do all these things, Jesus. Let's see some of that. It says the soldiers, they also came up, and they're mocking him too. So it's not just the leaders, the soldiers. They offered him wine vinegar to drink, and they said, if you're the king of the Jews, save yourself. And they're calling him King of the Jews because there's this written notice above his head that announces that. So everybody who passes by, as he's dying there, there's this sign mocking him above him there. This is the King of the Jews. And the soldiers are laughing at him, and the leaders are laughing at him, and he's saying, God forgive them. They don't know. It's just an amazing, even if you don't believe in any of this stuff, it's amazing literature. It's amazing that Jesus would be like that. That somebody would take that position and stance, and it's just powerful to think about. And it says even one of the criminals who's being crucified, he starts hurling insults at Jesus. Aren't you the Messiah? And you wonder, man, what's this guy thinking? I mean, he's in any other situation, he'd be getting mocked too. But he sees Jesus getting mocked, and he jumps in. Like, hey, I'm one of the cool guys too. He's on the cross. I can see how foolish this is too, and he wants to jump in and mock and laugh at him. But the other thief says, don't you fear God? And he's talking to the first guy who mocks him. You're under the same sentence. I mean, we're being punished justly because we're getting what we deserve. It's that first verse we read. You're going to get what you deserve. Somebody has to pay. I mean, a man's going to reap what he sows. God cannot be mocked. Sooner or later it's going to land on your head. That's how the world works. And that's what this guy says. Man, I see it, but this guy's not done anything. And in Luke, by the way, again, just this literature, it's kind of interesting because this guy calls Jesus innocent, and there's only a few guys who do. Pilate calls Jesus innocent. Herod, of all people, calls Jesus innocent. This thief on the cross calls him innocent. The centurion, after he dies, will declare that he was innocent. And the ones who can see it are not the ones you expect. And so he's we're going to be dead in 20 minutes. Less than an hour, we're going to be gone. I mean, how can you be mocking him in your last moment like this? And then he turns to Jesus. And he says, Lord, remember me when you get to your kingdom. And Jesus answers, truly I tell you, today you'll be with me in paradise. And then again, and in less than an hour, he was dead. I imagine him walking around in heaven, and people see him there, and they say, what are you doing here? And he says, I don't know. I don't even know where here is. I don't know that he even knows what he's asking Jesus for here. It may just be that he feels sorry for him. But he looks towards Jesus there at the end, and that's enough. Jesus himself, earlier in his life, tells a story about this sort of thing. He says there was a guy who had a vineyard, and he goes out early in the morning, 6 o'clock. If you've ever had to work outside, we lived in the desert in California, Julie and I did for a lot of years, and the farmers there start early. They're up before sunrise because it's just so brutally hot during the day. And so this guy starts around 6, and he goes out and tries to hire as many guys as he can to work in his vineyard. So I'll pay you a day's wages. And the guys go out and start working, and he goes back into town 3 hours later, around 9 o'clock in the morning, and he finds other guys still looking for work. Well, come on, I'll pay you what's fair. And then he goes out at noon, and so everybody's been working already for all morning. They're going to take lunch, and he finds some other guys, and he says, well, come on out, I'll pay you what's fair. And then he goes out one more time around 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It's only like an hour before quitting time. And he says, have you still not found any work? And there's one or two guys out there. No, we can't find anybody to hire us. Well, come on. I'll pay you what's fair. So they only work for like an hour. They don't even get a good sweat on, the sun's going down, and they get their last hour of work there, and it's time to settle up. And he pays the last guys first. He pays them a full day's wages, pays them a whole denarius, for the full day. And the guys who were hired all day, the guys whose shirts are just sticking to them, right, who've been sweating all day long, well, okay, if they're getting that, I'm sure we're getting a lot more. And at the end of it, though, he pays them the same amount. They all get the same. And the guys who were hired first, they're ticked off about it. How are you paying them? We're the ones who were out in the sun all day long. And he says, what are you mad about? I paid you exactly what I said I'd pay you. I said I'd pay you a day's wages, and I did. Why are you mad at them? Because they get more. And at first you say to yourself, well, that's an interesting, cute story. I don't totally get it. But it would tick you off too. It would tick you off too. If there was a union hall and they're getting all the pipe fitters together and they say, hey, you know what? Math is hard. So we're not going to worry too much with counting anymore. We're just going to pay you all the same. Whatever the top guy's getting, that's what everybody gets. You know who's going to be mad about that is the guy who's worked for 30 years, right? The guy who's been under the house for 30 years. The guy who hadn't been able to chew on his fingernails for 30 years. He's the guy who's mad about the whole thing. Well, wait a minute. You're paying him what you're paying me? I mean, after all I've done, all my experience, all this. I mean, it's always the guy who's getting the most that doesn't understand that deal, right? And it's hard to understand. I mean, this thief on the cross, he never goes to a Bible study. He never takes communion. He never prays, as far as we can tell. I mean, he never gets baptized. He never goes to church. He never does anything Christians are supposed to do. In all likelihood, if they had taken him off the cross, he might have went right back to being the thief. And yet he pays him the same as everybody else, and it's not fair. It doesn't make sense. And of course, it raises a question. Well, okay, if that's what he gets, then why do I have to do anything? I mean, he didn't pray. I think praying's hard too. So if he didn't pray and he gets to go to heaven, why do I have to pray? Or why do I have to go to church? Or why do I have to get baptized? Or why do I have to do any of the stuff? Why do I have to do any of those things? If he got to go in without doing any of that, why do I have to do any of that? And I've heard people through the years bring up the thief on the cross. When I say, hey, as a Christian, you ought to do this, or this is what we ought to do as Christians. Well, wait a minute. What about the thief on the cross? He didn't do anything. And with baptism especially, it's an easy thing to say. I think as a Christian, we're supposed to get baptized. Well, what about the thief on the cross? He didn't get baptized. And then I would say, okay, if you're nailed to boards, we're going to let you off the hook. But other than that, you got to get, and that never goes off like I hope it'll go off. But I'll say that to somebody, and it never goes. But that's always the argument, right? Well, then, how come they have to, if he didn't have to do it, and it's that fair thing again. It's that fair thing. If God saved him, then why wouldn't God save me if I don't do it too? Why do I have to do it? And it's always been a hard thing. And like I said, even that person who told me at the beginning of the sermon, the person who told me God had to forgive me for that. If you understand that God will forgive the thief on the cross, well, maybe he would forgive you for that. So I've been thinking about it all week. And I think the thing that the thief did is he got his eyes on Jesus. And I think that's enough. There's a story with Jesus where his disciples are on a boat and it's a storm and they're having a hard time and they see Jesus walking on the water and it freaks them out at first and they call out to him like he's a ghost and he tells them it's him and don't be afraid. And Peter's not sure if he believes it. He goes, that's really you out there, Jesus. Tell me to come out and I'll walk on the water with you. And Jesus says, come on. So Peter does. He hops out and he walks on the water with Jesus. And then it says he sees the wind and the waves. He began to lose faith, and he sank, and Jesus catches him. And it's all about focus, right? When Peter was focused on Jesus, he could walk on water. But when he sees the wind and the waves, then he can't anymore. And when it says he loses faith, he doesn't lose faith in Jesus exactly. He loses faith in himself. He knows, I can't walk on water. And you can't. There's just not one of you in here good enough to go to heaven all by yourself. You're going to need help to get that done. So you focus on Jesus. Hebrews 12:2, let's run the race with perseverance and fix our eyes on Jesus. He's the author and perfecter of our faith. He's going to take us through. He's like a magnet. And when I fix my eyes on Jesus, he draws me to righteousness. Like a magnet draws a piece of metal. He draws me to it. And as long as my focus is on him, I'm going to stumble into all sorts of good things. But when I take my eyes off of him, I'm going to be in some trouble. Imagine a big race of people, and we're racing towards the cross. But instead of the cross being 15 or 20 feet behind me there, imagine it's 200 miles from here, across mountains and oceans and all sorts of things, and we're all running that direction. And some of you have run that direction your whole life, since you're just a little kid, and you're way out there in front. Other people are just starting. And you can get a little discouraged if you're in the back and think, oh man, I'll never catch up with them. But you're facing the right way, and he draws us like a magnet. And when time comes and the finish line is called and the race is over, the ones who are facing him are going to be fine. Now you might think, well, that's not fair. Here's one guy who's actually walking the other direction most of his life, and then at the very end turned around. But that's what the thief on the cross did, and it's all about your orientation. You know, Judas followed Jesus for 3 years, and then at the end kind of walks away from Jesus. And then he totally walks away from Jesus, and he's not facing him anymore. And those 3 years of walking with Jesus, it's all over. You need to be facing him. He has your heart. And when he has your heart, he can make you do things that you couldn't do by yourself, and that's grace. And he does that for that thief on the cross. Man, he had no hope at all. And then Jesus breathes life into him. Something I didn't understand when I first became a Christian, and you'd watch these movies, the Christian movies about the cross, you know, the Jesus movies, and they're always kind of hard to watch. They're bloody, and I always thought that when Jesus died on the cross, that's what he bled out somehow. He was nails in his hands and feet, and he was whipped, and crown of thorns, and he bled out. But that's not how you die in crucifixion. It's when your arms are fixed up like this, and you can't move really. You can't breathe. You don't realize it, but I mean, you kind of lift up a little bit when you breathe. I mean, if you take a deep breath, you'll feel it, but when your arms are locked like that and you can't move, then that starts going to sleep. All those muscles start quitting, and your lungs start filling up with fluid, and you can't breathe. When you finally get to the end and your feet are nailed there, it hurts to breathe. You've got to kind of push up to get a breath by the end of your life. And a person dies in crucifixion, it's more like drowning. They suffocate up there. Every breath is like fire. And it hurt Jesus to say that. I mean, it cost him something to say that. Every breath would have been awful. Every word would have been precious. It was expensive. Because God can't be mocked. And somebody's got to pay for the stuff that we do. And when Jesus tells this man this good news, somebody's still paying. It's just him. You know, we come into this place every week, and I make more or less the same pitch every week at the end of it. I tell you that you don't have to go through this life alone, that you can just turn back and focus on Christ, and he will lift you up, and I believe that. I really continue to believe that Jesus is the answer for the world, that Jesus is the hope of the world. That too many of us go through our lives and we try to do our own thing and try to manage everything ourselves and live our lives as if he's not there, with the hope that he'll forgive me someday for it, I guess, and wonder why it feels like we're just going against the grain, and you can turn to Jesus, and he will make such a difference for you. And as your face is fixed on him, he'll start drawing the poison out of your heart, and he'll start drawing you towards him like a magnet. We talk about baptism, and a person goes under the water and the old person's washed away, but you can be made clean. Even if you've been on this race for a long time and you've been running for a long time, and your focus comes and goes. Any week, any moment, any day, you can choose to focus in there again on Christ. He is our living hope. And he's the one who's going to hold us tight and bring us across. So here at the end of the service, if anybody needs to pray about that, take advantage of the songs that we sing. When we sing them like they're prayers to God. I mean, really focus in on the words. And even if you fumble through the melody, don't let that bother you. Do the best you can, but you're praying it out to God. If you want someone to pray with you, there'll be people up in the front here and some people in the back. We'd be thrilled to pray with you and to talk to you about whatever we need to do, whatever you need to do next. So why don't you stand up? Let me pray with you right now. Dear Lord God, I thank you for this group. God, I know there's some in here in all different places. And more than a couple, God, probably who are carrying more than they need to. More than they think they can. So God, if there's anybody here today who needs to come and lay their burdens down at the cross, where you've already promised, God, to meet them there, then I pray you give them the courage to do that. In Jesus' name, amen.